Welcome to the program. For those of you who don't know who I am, I'm Mike Zentner. I'm the director of the Sustainable Scientific Software Division here at SDSC. And if you were at the last general staff meeting, you would have gotten a little bit of an intro into this program that is called Rev-Up that we're putting on. If you weren't there, we'll repeat just a little bit of that here this morning. But our main goal today is that we have had planned to do this in person, and obviously we can't do this in person currently at UCSD. The in-person meetings of this magnitude still aren't allowed. So instead, what we decided to do is try to give people a flavor of what this in-person meeting coming in the spring is really going to contain. And so what you're going to get today is a pretty high level survey of that and some interactive activities that we would go into much greater depth in that in-person session. Briefly stated, Rev-Up is about helping investigators at SDSC think about ways to increase revenue coming in both for their own benefits as well as for the benefits of SDSC. This is not starting a company type revenue. There's a different part of the university for that sort of thing, which we'd be happy to help you navigate a little bit. But what we're really talking about is something that's halfway between the typical research grant mode and the commercialization mode. So let's see, go ahead, Julianna, next slide. So if you were at the GSM, I tried to couch the benefits of this for you as an individual as being involved in a research process as really three things. Obviously, when we think about revenue streams, we're thinking about the sustainability of our efforts. So in some sense, continuity of support, who doesn't want that? Broader adoption, of course, is a key thing as we think about using our track records to propose new things and show that we've been successful at building broader adoption, which comes along with increasing a revenue stream. But I think the thing we don't often think we have the opportunity to do is to define and fund some of our own research agenda. And I think that's a real important component of this thing that we're talking about doing here that I hope many of you will have a chance to do as you go forward and through the program if you like what you hear and want to continue. Next. And it's not just about you, it's also about the center to which you belong and ways to increase the strength of that center. And I'll talk a little bit about that for a few slides. So next, Julianna. So this Rev-Up program has started already working with some projects that we identified early in a process called the Revenue Working Group over the last year. And that's looking at what low-hanging fruit are already at the center and trying to do something with that. And that's not really what we're talking about today. What we're talking about today is on the next slide, Julianne. And that is techniques that we can employ to try to increase in the upcoming year, 2 year, 3 years, more low-hanging fruit that can then be again harvested and used for increasing revenue both for your project as well as for the center. Next slide. And of course, that brings up the topic of harvest, right? And most of you are familiar with the grant process where you put in a proposal for some money, you get a certain amount of that money to do the work, basically pay your employees at cost to do the work. You donate some of that money to this thing called campus overhead. And what you might not be aware of is that some of that campus overhead does come back into SDSC as income. Not as much as of course anybody would wish, that's always the case, but it does come back and is used to invest in programs going on at SDSC. Some of you have probably benefited from this investment fund in the past, and Rev-Up is of course another thing that's being invested in from that pool. Next. But as we look at that equation of harvesting and who gets what, there's another mechanism for harvesting revenue that can be much more beneficial to you as well as STSC. And you can think about this as you get money to do the work, just like always. Campus gets overhead, but a smaller amount of that overhead. And STSC can increase its share of that central income. Now, on top of that, next, Juliana, if you do this right, your own research group, also gets funds to reinvest in the work that you're doing. And I'm not going to go through the exact formula of this today, but if you attend in the spring session when we do this in person, we'll go through that in much more detail as to how that works. And the reason is, next, Juliana, that amount that you get to reinvest in yourselves does not have to be minuscule. There are ways to structure this that if you create something that has a significant value, you can reap a lot of that benefit for your own group to reinvest in that group. And those are the kind of things that we would really like to see happen, because they benefit both the central income pool of STSC, but they also benefit us as investigators to go off and pursue our own agendas, not always waiting 9 months for an NSF proposal to find out whether we've been accepted or rejected, and so on and so forth, right? Next one. So how do you do that? We've been in a culture at STSC where we're highly rewarded for novelty. We come up with a new thing we want to propose. We propose that thing, we win, hopefully. Don't always win, but when we do, it's a glorious situation, and then we go and do the work and then come out the other side. But next one, Juliana. What this program is focused on is how we do what I talked about with these slices of apples. And that is repetition, lots of repetition, maybe with some variability. So it's all about investing your time in creating something that can be stamped out many times over, maybe with some modifications each time, but many times over, and delivered to many different people out there in the market to give them some value for which they're willing to pay, and have you reap the benefits of that. And both parties win, because you're providing value and they're getting value. Next. So the innovation here becomes somewhat, how do we deliver this service in a way that's more economical than maybe what we conceived of when we thought it was a research project? And secondary, the innovation here is, if you're successful in raising this share of funds that you can get back from the income to the university, how do you invest in future directions that keep you on top of that market where people are finding value from your work, right? And that's a little bit different than the typical sort of grant cycle thing. Next. So our goals, and I've talked a lot about our goal being increasing the center's revenue. And of course, that's why the center's investing in this. But I think the part that I don't want to underestimate about our goals here is, this is also a lot about forming a community of people. Maybe it's a subset of people within STSC that are very interested in how this works, and sort of feed off of each other as well, as not just me and the other folks you see here from the S3 group, but really to try to have a subculture within STSC that really pursues this stuff and is excited about it. Next. And so that's one of the reasons that we want to have this kind of session in person, is because we want that collegiality to get established during those sessions. And Nancy and Juliana and Jean and Mike have exercises to some degree where we encourage feedback amongst the groups participating as well. So what I would say is, to participate, you do need to have three things. You got to have the desire to do this, which is an alternate view of looking at risk, right? Because it's going to spend some of your time doing this, and that's a risk to allocate your time a little differently. You have to be willing to listen to the market when it's telling you that the thing you created isn't exactly what it wants, but there's a path to make it something like that. You've got to be willing to take that under your thoughts and and take that pivot. And of course, this program isn't about developing brand new research technology. It's about taking projects that are maybe at a close to technology readiness state to go out there and sell themselves and scale up their capabilities based on the demand in the field for what they do. Next. So how we do this is we augment the typical process of research. And a lot of times it's a bit of a simplification of it, but you can think of it as we have a great idea, we propose it, maybe we win that proposal, and if we do, we execute. And then a lot of times, whether or not lots of people outside of our immediate user community find it interesting is only an after effect or an afterthought. And what we're talking about doing, Julianna, next, is giving you some skills and some people to help apply those skills in constant validation activities that make that potential outcome of wider validation a lot more certain when it comes to that point in time where you think you might want to offer what you do to a larger audience out there that would perceive and take the benefit of the value from that offering. Next. So what we're going to talk about primarily today are the first 3 stages of this program, and I'll talk about the latter stages in a slide at the very end. But where we're focusing today is education. So this is like the precursor to education. I'd call this version 0.1. Stage 1 we actually hope to offer in the spring in person. Consulting, and you'll meet several of the folks you would consult with today on a one-on-one basis to help you apply some of the tools that are presented in that education. And then in-depth analysis, where the consultant would go much deeper into analyzing the prospects for a given project and what kind of technological and or scaling advances it might need to be something that it really has the chance to take off. Next one, Julianna. And what we propose to do in these first 3 stages is really start with a group of about 10 projects, which is about what we're seeing here today. Apply one-on-one time with 7 to all 10 of those, depending on the level of interest that you would have after going through some of these materials. And then take 3 and do a very in-depth analysis with a consultant assigned for many weeks to do what business-like analysis would do to really sort of understand what the prospects are, what the probability of reaching those prospects are. And then we would go into later stages of the process with you, which I'll talk about at the end. Next. And by the way, all of that stuff is not something you have to pay for. It's being funded by the Rev-Up project through SDSC. So the main topics you're going to hear about during this extended session fall into the 3 categories you see here. I'm not going to say a lot about these because Nancy and Julianna are going to talk quite a bit about these here today, I believe, and give you some examples of a couple of them. One more slide. Yeah. And so that brings up who's the team here on the Rev-Up program. Again, I think if you were at the GSM, you saw several of these folks, but I'm the leader of the program, and Claire, who started this, maybe, I don't know how we raise our hands or whatever, but Claire is the assistant director for the program. Our instructors and consultants are Nancy, Julianna, Jean, and Mike, and you're going to get a chance to meet Nancy, Julianna, and Jean in a little bit more detail today. So I'm not going to bother introducing them. They can introduce themselves quickly when they start their sections, if that's okay, all. And Mike won't be doing as much instruction today, but Mike is a financial analysis whiz and works with a venture capital company in Indiana, and will be participating in a lot of the work we do here in looking at financial viability of some of these projects, as well as helping you do some financial modeling. And then should we get to the later parts of the process with you, some of you, we've got a group of professionals on staff within S3 that can help with a variety of different aspects of bringing your product closer to market and maybe even helping you deliver it at scale. And again, these are all things that are funded through the program that we're not asking you to contribute additional money to, because we really want to be in a position to use SDSC funds to help SDSC projects succeed. And I think that's the last thing I have to say, and I'm not sure who takes over next. But next slide, just to make sure, Julianna. Yeah, so here I'm going to turn it over to whoever was scheduled to talk about the program today. And then I'll come back maybe and say something at the end about the rest of the program.
Yeah, awesome. Thanks, Mike. So I think it's me taking over at this point. So I'm going to start us off, and then Nancy and Jean will pop in, and we're actually going to be looking forward to hearing from many of you. So before we kind of talk about today's plan, if you haven't already, we'd love it if you can turn on your camera, mute yourselves, change your name to the name that you prefer to be referred by, because we like to be as interactive as possible in this virtual environment. So if we could see your faces, it's always appreciated. So I'll introduce myself when we kind of flip to the next slide. But today what we're going to talk about is these three kind of broad topics you see here. So what do you have? So how do you kind of define your product and talk about it and share that information with others? So how do you communicate? How special is it? So we all like to think that our babies are the most special out of all of the babies, right? But we need to evaluate that and see truly what is the value there and where does it fit? And Nancy will be presenting on that. And then last, we're going to get into who is it for and do they care enough to pay for it, which is a tough question to ask, but a very important one. So Jean will be talking to us a bit about revenue generation in the selling process. But first, I will go ahead and kick us off. Well, I'll stay here for a minute to just introduce myself. I'm Julianna Cassidan. I am in Indiana, so in the Lafayette area by Purdue University. I worked at university for 12 years. The startups that were commercialized and start companies. Since that time, I now also consult with nonprofit organizations and had been working with the Science Gateways Community Institute to work with research teams on sustainability through business practices. And that's me, that's it. So I'm excited to work with all of you projects better today. I'm gonna try and keep my eye on chat. Oh, yeah. Nancy, do you wanna go ahead and pop in and say hello real quick? Or do you want to have the participants say hello?
Yeah.
Yes. Okay. That's what I just want to make sure. All right. So before we get started, one more step. We would like for each of you, because it is a smaller group, we have time to say hello. So if you could just give us your name, maybe the position that you have at the institution and the name of your project. So no deep details on the project yet. We're going to get into that a little bit more, but if you could just start off with that so that we can at least know some names with faces. So if anyone would like to go ahead and pop in, please feel free to get us started. I'm not seeing names show up. Let's see. Andres?
Hi, yeah, hi, I'm Andy Götz, research scientist at SDSC, have an academic position. I'm a computational chemist and have a small research group here. And so one of the projects I've been working on over the last years is called Quicken. It's a quantum chemistry code that is different from most other quantum chemistry codes that are out there, and that it is GPU accelerated. It's a collaboration with Michigan State University. And so, yeah, we know, I don't know, I was just curious, you know, we're always looking for funding, if there are any ways to, influence the way I'm thinking about these types of software projects, because I always think about the science and what I'm curious and interested in and what other people might want to be interested in. And I know that everybody likes to use software that's free and doesn't pay for it. So this is also an open source software that we've been developing, and yeah, I'm curious to hear more about other approaches to distribute and potentially, get some revenue that's not only grant NSF grant based.
Awesome, great, nice to meet you. Danny?
Hi. So I'm actually sitting in as an observer today, so nothing specific. So I work part-time on the Sherlock side and then part-time with the S3 group and the Hub Zero team. And I'm just curious and heard about this on the GSM. And so I wanted to participate and just kind of hear from everybody and just see where this goes.
Awesome, nice to meet you. Mark?
Mark Miller. I run a science gateway project called the Cypress Science Gateway, and we have about 10,000 users, and NSF is tired of funding us, and so we're looking to we're working with a group called Phoenix Bioinformatics to try to collect revenue. And we're sort of in the process of collecting revenue now, but the adoption rate's very low, and just looking to hear about what's going on here and look for ideas and people to talk to.
Great, nice to meet you. Eric?
Yeah, hi, my name is Eric Odell. I'm a cloud solutions architect with the Sherlock group. Sandeep Chandra asked me to sort of stand in for him since he's in a competing meeting somewhere. And yeah, we host lots of diverse applications in a secure way. And I think from my perspective, one of the things I'm interested in is how we can scale that, given our, the number of resources we have, both in terms of attracting new, customers, so to speak, but also how we can service them in an efficient way.
Awesome, thank you for joining us today. Dmitry?
Hi, everybody. My name is Dmitry Kekowski. I'm a senior computational scientist and working in this project developing a numerical library for high performance computing. Been looking at it for quite a few years now. It's been supported by several NSF grants. And I'm very curious to find out if there is potential to support it through other means and find sustainability. So far, it's been open source, supported by NSF grants. So I am very interested in this topic.
Wonderful. Peter?
Hi, I'm Peter Rose. I lead the Structural Bioinformatics Lab at SDSC, so I deal with 3D protein structures. And as you may have heard recently, Google or Google DeepMind had a lot of success predicting protein structure using their deep learning methods. And fortunately, that code is now available. And actually, we have been able to install that at SDSC. But researchers can use the Google code, but it runs on Google Colab, if you're familiar with it. It's a free resource to run Jupyter notebooks based on the Google platform, but it's really very restricted what you can do. And the idea is, we can scale this up to run at an SDSC supercomputer to really enable, biologists to create models of 3D protein structures. And, and again, the idea is this will be a free resource for academics, but there might be, opportunities, let's say, for biotech companies who are not strong in, supercomputing, setting up large-scale cloud environments, etc. Maybe to pay for a service like that if we set it up. So that's the rough idea of that project that I'm considering.
Excellent. All right, Tony?
Hi, I'm Tony. I'm a developer. I work in the Cypress project with Mark. Mark is my supervisor. And just like Mark says, we are looking to have more subscribers to our Cypress project.
Great. Awesome to hear that you guys are trying things already. Ilya?
Hi, Ilya Zaslavsky. I runs Spatial Information Systems Lab. I have several projects where I have multiple users, and I'm interested in how to convert them into permanent revenue streams, obviously, and the fact that Mike and Claire are involved makes it very interesting for me, because I have been involved with the Gateways Institute for some time and liked it very much. So I look forward to learning from you and figuring out how this can be applied to the projects I have. One of them has already, it was started with NSF money, then NSF figured that it's ready for wider use, and then I should go out and generate some revenue myself. I think it was premature. I have a lot of users who don't pay anything but use it. About 500 people are registered. Most of them funds to just have the lights on the systems come from institutional, from some projects who wants to pay not very much money, but a little bit for some custom versions. So there is some scalability opportunities there. Another project is more recent. I've been working with San Diego County Office of Education to support their COVID-19 work. And there is some software that we are about to release once the 42 superintendents in San Diego approve it, which may happen anytime soon, but there are just many school districts here. And to support that and there are more than 1,000 schools in San Diego. So to support that would require some kind of revenue streams. So how to do this right, I will be looking to this group to tell me.
Great. Well, nice to meet you. William?
Hi, my name is Bill Holman, and I wanted to come and support my colleagues, Claire and Mike, work with them closely on the Hub Zero project, but also from the Research Data Services group, wanted to understand what the opportunities were here in case we have a referral opportunity to refer some of our folks that we work with.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining. Okay, I think I got everybody. All right, we will. Then I'm gonna put the screen share back on so we can move to the first step. So it was great to hear obviously the about each of you and a little bit about the projects. But we do want to get into it a little bit more. I think we already launched the poll and I think there was responses. Can you show the results again? Is that possible? So the question here being, what do you have a clear picture of? I'm testing Claire's Zoom knowledge currently to see if it can come back up.
We're sharing responses right now. Sorry, Juliana, if you can't see them quite yet. But the question for the folks that have answered so far, have a clear understanding of mission, vision. Some folks not quite there yet with their value proposition, or what we would be able to sell or generate funds from.
Great, thank you, Claire. Yeah, so no surprise there. The things that you all work on is from a scientific perspective and a technology development perspective. So knowing what the mission and the vision is of what you're trying to do with that technology and accomplish that makes a lot of sense. But thinking about it in terms of the value proposition, if you're even familiar with the term, we'll talk about that a little bit, but also thinking about, is there something here that we could sell, not just give away for free and provide to the academic community. So that's why you're here, right? That's why we're here, to learn a little bit more about what that might look like. So the very first thing that we want to do, like I said, this is going to be interactive. So we're going to be looking for feedback. So be prepared to unmute yourself, write in your chat, and you're going to need a little piece of paper to maybe sketch something out, or you can do this online if you have some kind of drawing tool that you like to use. So a napkin drawing, I have some of the answers here, but I just want to get a perspective maybe from one or two people. What is a napkin drawing to you? Or is this a technique that you use in your processes? So if anyone wants to just kind of hop on off of mute and describe kind of what a napkin drawing is to you. Danny, I think, are you talking? Not to me though.
I was just going like, I don't think I've ever heard it quaint that way. I don't know. Maybe I'm the only one, but
Yeah, you get the concept though, right?
yes.
Is this, so it like sketching, is that a tool that
Like
you
a mind
use
meld.
regularly?
Yeah.
Yeah, great. Yeah, so you want to just kind of talk about maybe if you give like a little scenario of when you typically kind of go through that process.
Oh boy. I feel like often, usually like if I have a solution and if I want to backtrack, I'll start with that in the middle and then I'll just start writing all the things I need to do to get there.
Totally.
Work
Yes.
backwards.
Yeah, that's great. Anyone else want to share? Okay, so yeah, so that's a great example, right? This is a tool, a technique that lots of us use. In business, sometimes it's called a napkin drawing, right? Where the idea being that you're at lunch with someone, you're talking about an idea, you're trying to describe your idea to them, then you might grab that cocktail napkin or that little napkin right there and sketch it out real quick, right? To have kind of that visual depiction that goes with it. So oftentimes, right, we use this as like a brainstorming methodology. So like you were saying, Danny, like kind of when you're trying to think through things and you need to visualize them, or building that technical schematic that you might be looking for to, you know, actually build out the solution or what the solution might look like. Or if you're trying to figure out how will this work? Is this even possible? Is this something that we can do, right? So like, okay, we're trying to solve this problem. What would be the solution and what would that look like? So this image here on the side is actually something right off of GitHub. This is what I would consider to be one of their kind of customer facing napkin drawings, right? This is a quick sketch of what it could look like when you kind of talk about a solution. It's not super user focused as to like why a user might care about these things or why this tool might be useful to them, but it's really talking more about the technical aspects of it, of the how it'll work piece, right? You kind of use this tool and it does these couple of steps for you kind of thing. But we like to think of a napkin drawing maybe as a little bit more user-centric. So we got to think about what is a napkin drawing to that user? What do they care about? So does anyone have an idea what this image is? I just found this yesterday and I absolutely love it. So this is one of Bell's first drawings of the telephone, right? So this was kind of a first iteration. And I think Nancy and Jean and I and Claire were meeting yesterday. We were talking about how like technologists are not meant to be artists necessarily. But there's this very like user-centric image here of how does this matter to the user and what value does it bring to the user? There's like a little bit of technical stuff in there, but the focus is really on what are the people doing and how are they interacting with it. And when we kind of think of these napkin drawings or these images of how we visually describe our technologies, we really do need to be thinking about the user and what do they care about and why does it matter to them? So I'm going to ask for some feedback on the next slide, so some preparation. So we think of this napkin drawing when it is user focused or when we're trying to communicate it outward to other people that are not in a technical space maybe. We think about it as being able to effectively communicate. So who is it for? You know, what does it do? And not really focusing though on the how it works part. So not getting into that technical aspect or using that technical jargon that might describe the thing. And the big focus being articulating what makes it distinctively different than what's being done today, right? So if someone were to present this as an option today, this Bell drawing here, we would say, well, there's already better modalities there. So like, what's different about it, right? What's unique? So people are looking to see how is it going to solve my problem more quickly or be better or faster or whatever. Right? So we have to articulate that difference. So just a quick feedback here. Anyone have an idea what this napkin drawing represents? Feel free to come off mute. All right, so it's Wi-Fi for high-speed rail. Do you see it now? Sometimes this image is not very clear. It's hard to see because it's really focusing on the technical aspect, right? The how it works part of it, showing how it bounces and where it pings and all of that kind of stuff, as opposed to really focusing on the people down here, which is, right, the part that matters. Are they going to use it? Do they value it? Do they care about it? So here's another little one that we like to show. And this is, we're about to get into an exercise that we're going to have you do. So ready that paper next to you or that drawing tool that you might have on your computer that you like to use. So again, by no means do we expect any of you to be artists. And this is represented pretty well by open topography. You might be familiar with the team, no offense to Chris or Vishu, but right, the merit here is actually in the depiction. So it really is representing not only what it does, right, the purpose that it serves. So it's collecting this data through LiDAR and multiple options up here, pushing it into this cloud where it's doing these processes and visualizing, and then it's showing how it's providing it to the people, the user communities that they have. So there's this way to kind of wrap those things together, right? Talking about what it is, what it does, but also thinking of that from a user perspective and including them in this kind of visual depiction. So what we're going to do right now is literally take like 2 minutes, maybe 3. And I want each of you to grab that napkin or your drawing tool and create a visual depiction of the technology or project that you're currently working on. And we are going to ask for maybe like 1 or 2 volunteers to share them. So please be prepared to hold a piece of paper up to the screen potentially. We are obviously very high tech. Thank you, Dmitry. It was great meeting you. Okay, just like 30 more seconds. Okay. Is there anyone that would like to volunteer? I'm also very willing to call on someone. Peter, you look like you really want to share. Yeah, can you unmute yourself real quick?
Okay, I don't know if this works, if you can see this.
Yeah.
Should I
Okay.
explain what it is, or are you guys supposed to guess it?
Yeah, can you go ahead and just kind of talk us
So-
through it?
So on the left, there's this biologist. He just found some new protein, and he knows what the protein sequence is. Oops, can you still see it?
There we go. Yeah.
And one way to do that in a high-tech way is to use that AlphaFold prediction software to predict its 3D structure. So that's in the middle. That's the 3D protein structure predicted from the protein sequence. And if you have that, you can maybe make some inference about what the function is. I mean, that's really the goal for biologists, to figure out what's the function of this new unknown protein. And by predicting its structure, you may be able to figure this out. So that's at a very high level, the idea here.
Okay. So where does your solution kind of come into this? Are you in the figuring out the function piece of it?
No, we are providing basically the infrastructure to make those calculations easily doable by a biologist. You know, basically providing SDSC supercomputers as a platform to do that. And we're going to make it easy by providing you a portal where you just paste in your protein sequence and it will do the calculations for you. And it will be fast because it runs on lots of GPUs and so forth, So basically we take away the pain for you to do this. As I mentioned before, this is difficult to do, unless you're, have the capabilities in terms of CPU and GPU resource. This way you don't need to worry about any of this.
Yeah. So how long would it normally take? So if a person was trying to do this on their own without those kinds of resources?
Yeah, it probably would take hours, especially if you're not just looking at one protein, but many proteins. It could take days or so. Hopefully this could do this, in a few hours or so. Basically, it's really not possible to do it without a supercomputer, if you don't do something larger scale. So really it's about the scale up that we can provide that you cannot do otherwise. There's competition. You could do things in the commercial cloud too. So that's definitely one concern, SDSC versus the commercial cloud, and what can we provide versus them, and so on. But
right.
One thing we provide is, the expertise, and we can adapt things to your special needs and so on. Where in the commercial cloud, they don't know anything about protein structures. So, you're on your own, basically.
Yeah, so that's great. Like getting into those unique differentiators right there, right? Because, HPCs are easier to access now than they were historically, and there is cloud computing that can be used. But thinking about that distinctive difference, right, that you have expertise and knowledge and know-how that you can help implement these things and make it a little bit easier, right? So whether that be through processing or visualization or just the formatting of the data. Yeah. Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you so much for volunteering.
Sure.
Kind of. I kind of coerced you into volunteering, I think, but I appreciate it. Would anyone else like to volunteer? Nobody? Andy? Eric? There you go.
I can
Andy said,
show
why
you
not?
what I put. I don't know. I was very slow, but
Yeah.
let me switch off that background. Maybe that helps. Okay, so that should work better.
Excellent.
Anyway, so that's what I came up with. So that what people are thinking about is molecules, and that can be in different contexts. So that can be, the chemical industry, computational drug design, their AI algorithms. What they need to know about those molecules is properties. And what our code does, it computes it using, quantum mechanics, and it can be used for simulations, and it's free. There are many other codes that do the same thing. They're not all free. And the ones that are free are usually not as fast as ours. So that's the main differentiator and one of the drivers why we develop this code. Now, so that's basically, I want to show somebody about this specific project.
Yeah. So why do they care about it being fast?
Because the computations are expensive. So, if you want to screen drugs, for instance, you have to do thousands and thousands of calculations. The calculations, they can run anywhere between minutes to hours. So you save either you get the answer fast in a reasonable amount of time. The graduate student in a research group doesn't have to wait for months, or you get it cheaper, right? Because you need less computational resources.
Yeah, great. So again, hitting on those differentiators that are there. Awesome. Well, thank you so much for sharing. I appreciate it. Okay, so we'll go back to the slide share. Let me see here. So I appreciate you all playing along and thinking about those a little bit as far as how you kind of visually depict and describe the technologies that you're working with, and really thinking about what is it that is uniquely different about them. So the thing that we recognize in this process, that was a fun exercise to do, but this is really deep work that takes a lot of time to really think about defining the value. for a user. And a lot of times what we find is that there's multiple reasons why it's a better solution for the user. So it can be really hard to define which value is of greatest to the user and why do they care about it the most, right? So part of what we have to do, and part of how the Rev-Up program really helps you, and what myself, Nancy, Jean, and Mike will do with you through these processes, is really thinking about how do we define that value? What are all of those potential values that are out there when it comes to this solution that you have? And then we'll actually take it to the users. We'll go to the customers and go through a discovery process with them, where we actually try to validate or invalidate, right? Find the answer of what is it that they really care about? What pain is it that they're facing? Is it time? Is it money, or some other resource that they're at a deficit with and they need help with, that you're able to provide to them in a way that is meaningful and useful to them? So we go through that discovery process. We get the feedback from the customers to be able to do then that validation and articulation. So that last phase is what it looks like ultimately is then your kind of communicative language. How do you market this thing? How do you talk about it to your users in a way that convinces them that it's worth paying for? So Jean's going to talk about kind of that sales cycle and how do we, that final, like, making the ask of someone to pay. But first we need to validate, is there something that they're even willing to pay for? So in Rev-Up, that's one of the steps that we'll go through when we think about kind of the evaluation of the market and the user and value propositions and why they care. Any questions right now? I'm going to hand it over to Nancy, who's going to take us through the next step. But if there are any questions out there, I would love to answer them.
Yeah, question about the customer discovery. Where do you look for customers, in which areas? Academic, national labs, companies? I mean, there's wide range. Yeah. How do you do that?
Yeah, so really what we do in this process, I mean, it's a lot of interviews. So it's not just talking to a few people, it's talking to, 30 to 50 people probably, and in lots of different industries. So part of what we would do is in what we do in like the focus week time, where we would get together, is this dissection of, okay, who are all of the potential users that could value this, right, and have benefit from it? And Nancy's going to talk about that a little bit more in the next section. And then we look at that and we say, okay, we know that we need to go talk to, biologists or physicists or whoever in whatever field, right? And that could be in academia, it could be in the national labs, it could be in industry or in government, right? So we're going to look at it with you and say, okay, we think this could be useful to lots of different areas. And then we talk to each of them and see where is the real interest, where is the real value, and who values it the most and has urgency to solve the problem that you're able to solve. So it's going to be through all kinds of connections, right? We'll reach out to your contacts, to SDSC's contacts, to our contacts, to really get those conversations going and make sure that we're talking to the right people. Did that answer your question?
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, of course. Any other questions right now? Okay, I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to Nancy, who's going to take us to our next step.
Thanks, Juliana. Yeah, and as Juliana's been saying, I mean, what you're seeing today is it's always hard for us to figure out what slice to share, given what the purpose of the meeting is, because you're seeing just a real taste of what we get to work on together when we do the longer course. And the longer course is essentially designed to be a way to let people do some of that work on their own. What's so great about this Rev-Up program is that you really wouldn't have to do all of it on your own. We actually would be there to be able to help you all the way through. So we're very actively thinking about how we're going to retool everything so that it feels like every engagement you have with us, starting with now, is going to keep building. And you're going to keep taking these little exercises, but actually deepening them. So Juliana mentioned quite a bit just now about customer discovery and audience when you did these sketches. Coming out of that first conversation she had about what is it, that is actually 20 minutes today, but a very long series of exercises that we do with people. And we're not going to share the exact curriculum today. Today is, again, just meant to give you the flavor. But essentially what that looks like is first the conversation about what do you think you've got here? What does it look like? What does it do? And then your best guess. We tend to call these things hypotheses because, you know, we're in research land, but that's also really what it is in a business sense. What's your best guess at this point, based on everything you know, about what your audience is, who's going to use it, who's going to care about it, and what's your best guess about what's the other competition look like out there? Who else is doing what? Already on the call today, several people are very much aware that there are commercial alternatives and are thinking hard about what differentiates them. And when you take those two pieces and think about them together, who is it for and what else could they be doing? We start to edge people towards defining what we've referenced probably as a value proposition, which is a really specific thing. It's a way you talk about not just why this is good, but very specifically why it's helpful in a specific way for a specific group of people. And so this is a process. So this is the kind and gentle version, but we start kind of twisting the screws and getting closer and closer the more work we do together. So I'll tell you a little bit about my background, and then I'll share hopefully a fun exercise to help you think about the competitive landscape. But my background actually was in commercial book publishing, mostly because the person who hired me swore that it was a sales job, but it wasn't really sales. So I fell for that. And it was actually a job selling national accounts for an art book publisher back when Barnes & Noble itself was ramping up to being a national account and a major chain. Those were days seem long ago. But after some experience in a very kind of sales and goal-focused commercial setting, I spent a chunk of time in graduate school, and then I came back and ended up for about a decade working with an organization called Ithaca SNR, which is the parent company for JSTOR, Journals Database. And so what I got a chance to do there was think about how business questions were becoming very valuable in the academic space for things like digital initiatives. So the whole world was translating things from print into online formats. And so that's a long way around saying I have this strange expertise that seems to have come together around how projects in the academic space can think about applying business strategy in ways that help them. They don't necessarily need to commercialize, but they should be functioning in a way that benefits as much as possible from business strategy. So all that to say, I feel your pain. I think these are great questions you're asking, and it's great to hear the progress already made. And when Julianna and I work with clients, we're actively thinking about what things do we know that we can help you with, and obviously also Jean and Mike. We're also always trying to think about what elements of the commercial world are very important here. And the first chunk of things you've heard about in terms of defining the product and the service, describing it in a value proposition, it's a must-have before we can even imagine what it is you're going to sell and who you're going to sell it to. So that's a first step. So this question we're going to talk about for a second here that I can share with you is, now you think you have something great, how can you think a little bit more about first making it stand out from the pack? How do you define what makes it unique, and specifically unique in your users? And not just something exceptional, but also something that's valuable, something that fits in with the needs and the workflow for the people who are going to use it. So Julianna, if you could flip to the next slide. We have a little poll for you again. So get ready. I see there may be 8 people here. Let's see if we can get 8 responses. The question is, when you think about the landscape and competitors, what do you think about them? You think is it relevant to your work? Can you avoid thinking about it? All right. Oh, I can't believe no one fell for my first choice. Okay. We can end the poll and share the results. Terrific. So I'm pleased that no one felt that they had no competitors. I'm pretty sure you wouldn't be here, but you'd be surprised or not. There are plenty of people developing really innovative things that think that it is so innovative, therefore I don't have any competition. And it is unlikely to be the case, as we will discuss in detail if we get to work with you. Several of you are aware that there are other options out there, and I don't know if it's the same several people or maybe it's single choice, and others are aware that actually there's a tremendous amount of competition. I wonder if anyone might like to come off mute and tell us what their thinking is. And again, I remember I heard a couple people mention specific examples in the intros. What competition do you have? What are you aware of? What are you actively thinking about in terms of your biggest competitors?
I'll say something.
Sure.
I've become aware that in France, a free service that does what some of what Cyprus does has become available. We can differentiate ourselves from them in some ways, but also there's competition with people having local machines. Some people run on their laptops, and it's dreadfully slow, but it's free. So, I mean, the biggest competition are free alternatives.
Yeah, well, and I'm wondering what other people think about that. Is that when you're concerned about thinking of commercializing, not commercializing, but charging for something that might be free, is that a big concern that others have as well? Is that Pete?
Yeah, I mean, I have exactly that same concern that Mark just said. There are free options out there, and if you have a graduate student, you let them run it for a few days. That costs you nothing compared to paying $1,000 to run it on maybe in some service. I think that's definitely an issue for the academics. Maybe less so for industry, because for them time is money. So they rather get it done quickly than spending human resources on that. So I think that there's potential commercial usage there.
Yeah, I mean, we're in a strange space because there's been such lately, even very very heartfelt explanations and very good explanations for why certain things need to be free, especially and freely accessible, specifically in the academic space. So there's a built-in little challenge here. But does anyone have a different way of thinking about this they'd like to share? Because obviously we all think there's a possibility. So, I mean, in terms of charging for something where the competition is free, there's also the risk that there are people out there who are charging a lot for it. What do you think we really want to be thinking about the most, maybe besides price even? Because if it was really just about free, we'd have our answer and we could all go home. Well, I'll just put out there that clearly we feel like there is something that you could charge for. And we also feel like there might be ways to think about other differentiators that are things that are near and dear to your users, where executing something extremely well, and whatever that means for what you're building, is going to have to be more important than whether you're charging or not charging. So we're going to think really hard about what those differentiators are going to be. So Julianna, can you get us to the next slide? So there's an exercise that actually Julianna shared with us, but I'm going to just show you what it looks like because it's super fun. Plus you get a cute second drawing out of it. And it's to start thinking about what's the problem space that your solution is addressing. Where are you working, and are you aware of what the other options are out there? And again, I know you are. And then finally, what does the closest competition look like? And most importantly, how are you a little bit different? Let's go to the next slide. So we're actually going to draw a map. We're doing everything lightning speed here, guys. This is the most efficient workshop we've ever run. You'll have a couple sketches, and we'll get a chance to complicate it a bit more later. But for today, we just want to give you a taste. So we're going to talk about a little grid. We're going to have you think about what's the problem you're in, space you're solving. But then the really, really important part is what about your solution makes it stand out in a way that is significant. And even if it's not happening today, what do you think will be significant enough, a differentiator, so that people someday would choose to use it and would choose to pay for it? Next slide. Oh, Juliana, there's all kinds of animation. You're just gonna have to keep clicking away. So here's the example. If you think about mobile device, let's just stay on that one for a second. Sorry. So the first trick in figuring this out is thinking about the space you're in. Some of you are talking about providing compute capacity. Some of you have collections of material. Some of you have tools to use to analyze things. But there are probably ways you're starting to think that you feel what you've developed stands out from other options. Are you doing it faster? Are you doing it in a way that's more enjoyable? Are you doing it in a way that is more effective? In different ways from others out there. So maybe I'll, well, let me show you this example, and then I'd like, so start thinking about what those differentiators are, because I want to hear some ideas come out of this group, even just today. So if you're thinking about mobile devices, this is one way of thinking about what at least two of those variables could be. And so it doesn't really matter what's X and what's Y. And the answer is yes, there's a million other ways. There aren't just two ways, but we're looking in 2 dimensions right now. So we're just going to stick with 2 for the time being. So let's say for mobile devices, we look at functionality as one axis and portability as another. Actually, Juliana, can you click on the next one? It will all miraculously populate. So here's a way of looking at it. Let's say something like laptop computers shows the potential to have a high degree of functionality, but pretty low on the portability scale. All the way moving over towards the right of portability as you get smaller and more clever towards smartphones, then smartwatches, which may by rights lose some of the functionality that you would have with, let's say, a laptop, you know, by way of comparison. So you start to see where if you have a solution that you're trying to figure out where are gaps, am I living right on top of another type of solution out there, or am I coming up with something new? You should be aware of what the choices are and where you would like to be. So Juliana, can you click again? Maybe another couple times, sorry. So here's a different space of a solution. Who wants to tell me what that looks like and why it's living where it's living? I don't know if I've ever actually seen one of these in person. Just anyway, who can tell me a little bit about this? And if not, I'll call on Juliana.
Is that the smart refrigerators?
No, but I love that you asked that.
I was gonna say, because there's that too. Sorry, I was like thinking down that path. I was like the refrigerators that have all the digital stuff.
Yeah, exactly. And it looks like one, right? But if you think about it, so if we move along portability but with higher functionality, I think these are the Galaxy, these are the phones, right, that have a folding screen. So
that's what that is. Oh, yes, that makes more sense.
Yeah, but
First thing I thought it was a fridge.
No, but that may be my favorite answer ever. So extra points. And it looks like one. But it's there because there's a question. You know, here's the space we're in. We need mobile devices. We need computing devices doing a range of things now that phones do. And it does fit a gap. It's a gap maybe people never even knew existed, but you know, it's a space that has some overlap and also some additional benefit that wasn't in the previous solution, which you'd imagine to be just the smartphone with a single screen. How about, Juliana, one more click on that? We'll have a look someplace else on this map. Yeah, so how about something like this? I'm sorry, someone want to come off, or Juliana come off? Just add another voice to the chat.
Yeah, I can throw it in there. So this is the Microsoft Surface. Everyone's kind of familiar, and really position themselves as you know, the tablet laptop combo, higher processing speed than a standard tablet, right? But having that like portability of a tablet kind of thing. So being able to find this like open space in the market.
Right. So there's going to be an answer. Anytime you're looking at a, thank you, Juliana. Anytime you're looking at a space like this, you're going to want to have a good feeling about why it's worth doing something new, why what you're doing is something different, and what's your argument for doing something that is different. So what's going on in the lower left over here? Is there a value to, there's a lot of white space there. Anyone want to live there? Maybe, I think that's our refrigerator. I like it already. But so, you know, this is just a reminder that white space sometimes is for a reason. There might be things that actually don't exist because people don't really want them. So that's a risk. So we don't want to just be enamored by filling a gap in that way. But you absolutely, again, want to have an argument for why you're filling the space you're filling and in what way, you know, who's to the left and right and top and bottom of what it is you're doing. Because that's going to be how you explain to people why they should make a choice that's towards you and away from something else. So now I would love, if you want to click again, Juliana, I would love to hear from people first about when they think about that X and Y axis, which for today is really just two. What do you think differentiates your work from what you perceive to be the other competitive offerings out there? Let's talk a little bit about it, because the next thing we do is we operationalize this and we go out and see if it's true. So let's just put a first thought out there. What makes your offering different? Oh, tough room. Anyone?
You know, I think even sometimes deciding on what those two axes are is difficult. And maybe if you can't immediately talk about what makes your offering different, how would you go about structuring such a plot would be a way to start thinking about this.
Yeah, well, I mean, is that, I'm fine if people are just feeling like it's not like they don't feel like sharing today, but are people actively having trouble coming up with those? Because it would not be surprising to hear that. When Juliana and I have run this exercise, I can share with you that often it's very hard to do. And often the first two things people think of do not end up being the things that they end up with. A lot of people will, yes, tell me.
Oh, sorry, yeah. So one obvious thing, if I think about what we've been developing in this specific project, is a cost versus performance, you know, or time to solution. But, you know, I think this is a highly multidimensional problem, right? You can build many of those maps, probably different types of maps for different types of projects. And you might want to use different maps depending on whom you're talking to.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and I don't mean to oversimplify this, but one thing that can bring it into scope a little bit easier is to start off by literally choosing that title and making the title the problem that a specific user group is having. You can, because one of the things that makes this so multifaceted is that, as people have already mentioned, you don't just have one user or even one category of users. You may very well have lots of different folks who are in it for different reasons. So Andy, I'm trying to quickly remember your project. This is the quick project, right? So you may have, I mean, even within something that is, yeah, I don't know it well enough to take too many good guesses here, but even when you're looking at offerings that allow people to run high-level computational work, you even have different users. Some might be senior members of a lab and some may be graduate students, for example, and they may opt to choose something for very different reasons. For some, cost could come into play, for others functionality, or even an interface that speaks to people who are less sophisticated. There's all kinds of things. So a good step for this would be to define for whom the solution is intended, and just take one group of users to start. So it's hard to do this in the abstract. I'm wondering if anyone does want to share when they think about what makes what you're working on stand out. What's the reason that you decided to do it? Gee, if only I did this, it would do it quicker. It would allow us to scale this up and offer it, more efficiently to more people. I'm wondering what some of those reasons and what we'll call differentiators look like.
I can comment on that.
Sure.
When we came into existence, phylogenetic codes could be run on laptops, except because there wasn't high throughput DNA sequencing. And so as those the amount of sequence is enormous now, and computation is the rate limiting step in discovery, right? It used to be data acquisition, but now it's data processing, really, analysis. And so, the laptop became becomes a 2 or 3 or 4 week computation for a lot of simple things, and and for one problem at a time. Whereas we offer, the ability to run many jobs simultaneously and get the result in 1/10 the time.
Mm-hmm.
So that's our differentiator. Now that AWS exists, you can get the same compute power, but you don't get a user interface, and you don't get no one installs the codes for you. You have to learn how to interact with a bare metal situation.
Yeah, Mark, thank you so much for mentioning that, because it's a great example. And it also suggests a whole category of thinking that a group like this will get value from, I think, not from me so much, but from speaking with each other about what it means, how much extra value does the fact that this is literally taking place among academics, among researchers for researchers, how much value does that add? And I'm going to suggest it adds a lot of value, and I think part of our trick together is defining that and building that in, because there are free alternatives and there are generic alternatives. But you probably feel that there's a major difference. Now, how do we go out and figure out if what you think is built in and makes for that enough of a delta is actually enough? And that's when, again, we come back to the customer discovery piece. And we say, you know what? I thought it was going to be so special because it was built for the community by the community. And then we have to find out if that's what's really happening. And the only way to find out, you can measure the statistics of what's going on in your space, and you go out and talk to people and figure out what they're doing. Not just people you know, but people you don't know. People you wish were part of your target audience. So I would love to give folks a few minutes, 3 or 4 minutes, to just sketch this out. A couple of quiet moments to think about what this map might look like. I'm a little nervous about hearing crickets when we come back, but Julianna, you still game to give it a shot? Put a couple minutes on the clock and see if folks can give a little sketch. And even if you just come up with a couple of ideas for how you might name your problem space for a group of users and how you might imagine you differentiate yourself, that would be plenty great to get started. So let's do it maybe 3 minutes, 4 minutes, see how that goes.
I have the timer running. can tell people are thinking hard about it. It's a tough one.
All right. So I wonder if anyone would like to share, we can stop screen sharing so folks can hold up their works of art, or even just share verbally what a couple of differentiators might be, or how they even define the space they're operating in. We have any takers?
I'll go. I don't know if you can.
Yep.
Try to get this, but my graph, I guess I would call time to solution, time to resolve.
I think you might be covering your microphone a little bit. You're a little muffled.
Uh-oh.
There we go.
Is that better?
Yeah. There you go. Yep.
Okay. So one axis is cost and one axis is speed, time to solution. And so here, let's see, the user's last, no cost, very slow. Okay.
Yep.
And then we go out on this, the free axis, and you get to potentially almost as fast. Well, this is the fastest. And here there's a no cost for phylogeny.trans, which is competitor. There are other differentiators. I mean, they don't store your data. They don't keep results more than a few days. And for data sizes beyond a certain point, right away. So,
I think you might need to pull yourself to the side of your notebook again.
okay.
There we go.
All right. Better again?
There we go.
Did you hear
Yeah.
any of that? Okay.
Yeah.
And
It
then,
was just a little muffled.
okay. And then out here, they might have a local resource that's free. You know, I mean, quote unquote free, right? If they can get the admin to install the codes they want and keep them up to date and whatnot, you know, those are all things that we do. So, but that's free, quote unquote. And then Cypress would be here, you know, $100 or something like that for a subscription. And then if you want the same speed from Amazon, having nothing installed and having to do everything yourself,
Right.
having no access to help. So if it goes wrong, you know, they can call someone with 20 years experience and ask them a question for free. Here, you know, you get no support whatsoever, but, and it's also 10 times more expensive than Cypress, would be per core hour.
So one of the things, to take this to the next step, is that we would want to figure out to what extent cost really is the problem. Because, and again, like Julianna frequently says to folks when we run this exercise, you may want to take cost out of this as a key differentiator. In other words, ask the question functionally, are we doing, you know, is what we're doing different and better before we even address the question of cost? Would people do this regardless of the cost, even if we were expensive, because the way we do it is so much better, right?
Yeah, I think I know the answer to that already.
So we'll keep trying to figure out ways that the answers always will come up yes, you know, no matter what, because you want it to be in the content of it, not just competing on price, particularly when we're hoping that you can eventually be charging in a way that supports the health of the enterprise. But I like that a lot. And that's a great way to think about it in terms of particularly differentiating on speed is huge. So we should move on only because we've timed this pretty closely and I'm keeping an eye on the clock. I think I may be a tiny bit over, but I wanted to share, Julianna, if you don't mind putting up the next slide. Another quick poll for folks. And this is a little bit different. This is asking the question, if you've been out there already and you have some version of your product or service out there, we're thinking about scaling it up, we're thinking about charging for it. Our question for everyone is, what evidence do you already have that there's some demand out there? Because these are the people we're going to go to see to what extent is price an issue, to what extent is a certain kind of functionality the issue. How much demand do you perceive out there already? Great. So I'm seeing the responses start to come in, and already 3 people have mentioned they already have clients, which is fantastic. That's a great sign of demand and very encouraging. People having approached you to do work, even if they're not yet clients, again, that's very concrete and a great way to think about it. And even if you're just looking at activity on the site, some mark of engagement is also important. So these are all things we'll look at. Before we start kind of identifying who these key segments are, the first thing we do is we capture your data, we look at it, and we figure out where you already see something interesting percolating. So it's wonderful to hear that there's already something out there. And again, these are the folks that we're going to start to think about. We care a lot about what they think about what differentiates you from the other things they could be doing. The part about just having the key word is just in there. It's great to have a good feeling, but if all you have is a good feeling without any of the evidence, we're going to push pretty hard to see how quickly we can get some more evidence of that demand coming from the user's side, because that's going to be super important. So last slide, Julianna. Thank you. The way this translates into our program is in a few different ways. And again, these are chunks of work that will help you structure. And if we work with you as consultants, we'll actually help you execute. It's really important to have done a thorough landscape review so that you actually don't just know what's out there, but you get a sense of how well those other things are going, how big their audiences are, how much business they may be generating. You want to get a good sense for what your competition is. And also it may give you maybe a good learning experience, and it may introduce you to potential new partners. People who are operating in this space, but maybe just adjacent, could end up being a big time and money saver for you in other ways as we go forward. We do a piece of work that's an audience assessment. So once we have an idea, not just of who's using what you've got now, but where you think the potential is, we can start to talk to people and not just figure out how many there are, although we like that too, but we want to know how what you do fits into the life they're living today. We're not trying to convince them to do something they don't need. We want to help them in the world they're already living in. So that's what we're going to try to learn more about. And finally, those pieces of information are going to start to point towards a more or less likely set of revenue options. You'll just start to see how this coalesces around some things that may be possible and some things that are going to be really a bridge too far. But that's another discrete piece of work where we'll take you through a brainstorming exercise. We'll rule things out. We might narrow it down to other things, and then we'll start testing the feasibility of very specific revenue ideas. So with that, I will hand it off to our sales guru, Gene, for the next piece of today's presentation.
Great to meet everybody. Gene Eberhardt. I've come from 20 years of military service, 15 plus years of commercial service in oil and gas space, and some general industry backgrounds, selling everything from small widgets, if you will, all the way through multi-million-dollar large-scale projects with multiple months of rev up or generation to all the way through execution completion. So you all independently work in a lot of different spaces that are very appealing. And it's interesting to listen to some of the exchange back and forth. As Nancy reviewed and discussed, all this leads up to revenue models, and what are these different revenue generators that you have looked at currently in the past, or where do we think we could potentially get revenues to be generated from? So on to the next poll. I promise this is the last poll. We look at, and I've heard several subscription models, potential sponsorships, maybe a membership model, some customization services. Or there's always the we've never tried revenue generation. That could be an interesting topic. So let's see. Unfortunately, they're anonymous, so I'd like to know who's our never tried revenue generation person. But it looks like the subscriptions, obviously consulting and customization, definitely are leaders in the poll. So the next question is, has anybody experienced any difficulty generating these revenues? We think about how to best, who are we appealing to? What are those revenue sources, and ultimately what do we need to take it to the next levels? And as Mike mentioned, where does this go to the center? And how do we not backfill, but fill in some of these revenue streams that, whether NSF is terminated funding, there's multiple different things that can happen, as I'm sure most of you have experienced already. So how do we get out there and sell this? I guess one of the questions I want to ask you as the participants is, what is the hardest thing for the academic leads to do? And feel free to unmute and jump in with a thought or an answer. Anybody?
I think asking people to pay for something when you're in a largely free environment, I feel a lot of internal conflict about that. And I think that's a problem for me personally. Mm-hmm. And so getting someone else to make the ask is probably my best strategy.
I'm here to help, Mark.
Woohoo!
Anybody else want to comment? So I took it a liberty. My thoughts were, as far as understanding the value or the potential fit inside or outside academia would be some of the things that y'all are maybe struggling with. Identifying your network inside and outside of academia and communicating with them. Communication is key as we're asking for sales, asking for the subscription models, or even asking for potential leads or network connections to help you get to another person or another level of that sales approach. So the next question, how involved do the project leads need to be? If we're in Rev-Up, do we just hand this thing off and run with it? Or what's your thoughts as far as your involvement with the product and the project? Anybody have any thoughts there?
I could break the silence if the crowd is shy today. I'll just mention that The good part about what Jean mentioned is that there's a team that can absolutely help do this. And the bad part is that if it's your project, it's still always it still always rolls back to you. And so when, the willingness to kind of take on and really get excited about what it means to get that out there is always going to be something that's part of, that's part of what the leader of the project ends up doing. To the extent that we can actually be a motivator and actually have some feet on the ground to get it done a bit faster, I think is great. But the projects we've seen that are really successful have leads that continue to be, deeply engaged in all aspects.
Well, and to that point, thanks, Nancy. By the nature of your works, you're all storytellers. And as a product lead, you must be able to tell the story of the product and services so others can clearly understand it and accept it and carry it forward. You'll see this in later pieces as we go through this, but it revolves around the elevator pitch. For me to understand what you have, Mark, in years of doing the project build out, the research and so forth, we'll never get it out in 20 minutes. But we have to clearly have a time and space so we can understand, I can understand what it is that the project is, both from Julianna and Nancy's perspective, and the modeling of the landscape and all the things that have led up to where we are today, up to, I think you said 10,000 users of the Cypress platform. It didn't happen overnight, but as the lead, you have that tribal knowledge, if you will, of the project, and we need to understand that to help facilitate the rest of the process. Next question, how is selling for academic-led projects different? It's not really a fair question because you're all on the academic side and I'm on the commercial side, so. Anybody have any thoughts on that? So one thing that came to my mind is you've had the funding to take this concept to the next level or levels without the corporate pressure of making it a revenue generator in a compressed time frame. Somewhat compressed because obviously you've got a funding window that may or may not be expiring in 3 years, 5 years, whatever that is. You obviously want to continue the platform and continue to make ground gains in that space. So that's where I see academic-led projects are different than commercial, where commercial there's, we have an R&D think tank, R&D budget, and it's only going to sit there for so long without a lot of pressure. Corporate dollars are involved. They want to see progress. They want to see movement. And obviously they want to get into the market space and be that next lead project in the space and leave the competitors behind. So we can change that.
I'll just quickly maybe ask, Eric, I know you mentioned that you're coming in with the perspective of Sherlock, and I'm wondering if you have a comment for the last question. How is selling for academic-led projects different?
So I think we span commercial and education, so I don't know if it's a fair question to ask, or maybe it is. So definitely one of the differences between commercial customers and education is money usually. Another issue is that a lot of times you run into the issue of people thinking that they can just do it themselves, and they don't understand the kind of overhead that's involved of doing everything yourself. And I think that's probably more a prejudice on the EDU side. And that's one of the things that it can be a hard sell to say, you know, for us, you know, one of the things that we're trying to do is make it easier for people to get their stuff to their customers. So instead of, you know, so that we're essentially brokers of compute services, we bring a lot of experience. So selling that idea can be difficult. So I'll just stop there because that's a lot of words.
It's a great point, Eric. I mean, a lot of these, whether it's EDU, whether it's company, if we throw a bunch of hardware in the compute closet and turn it on, it'll take care of itself, and it's clearly not the case. They don't think about that side of it, or many don't think about it. I shared a story with Mike. One of the oil and gas companies was implementing new software package. We won't name any names on any front, but before the software implementation, you could get an elevator without any issues. There were 6 to choose from. But when you throw more and more software people at a problem in a company, all of a sudden you literally had to wait 15 minutes to get an elevator. There were so many consultants, so many people in the process and project that they never looked beyond the fact that it wasn't just a plug and play operation. They had no idea what they were getting themselves into, and the customization and the ground game efforts that it takes to implement some of these large scale projects for a national company. So there is some opportunity there to join and explain the process as we dive through this and inform the customer, the potential customer base of just that. Next slide, Julianna. Past challenges. So we saw from the revenue generation poll, it's kind of a mix. We've definitely seen challenges across the board. Are they going to go away? They're not. But we can absolutely figure out a way to bridge the gaps and get the product or the services out there into a space that will succeed. With selling challenges, what is the hardest thing for the academic leads to do when it comes to selling? You're all stretched for time. We're all stretched for time. That internal and external networking, the competition from the commercial resources, and as EDU, as Eric was talking about as well, staffing resources. There's many different challenges that come into play here. We are going to work to create and operate a sales pipeline from the leads and the prospects, the generation of those by the interviews of the participants, the interviews of the companies, all the way through deal closing. Like Mark said, ask who's going to raise their hand and ask for that next round of funding or subscriptions, or how do we get from here to the next level? That's what we're here for. That's what I'm here for. The dreaded CRM tools and programs, often we don't think about it. We think we can handle it internally in the startup phase. Yeah, it can be. As we all know and have complained about the free resources, everybody wants it free, and there's plenty of free resources out there in the CRM space. If we're only doing simple CRM, it is a free tool and resource that we can utilize. But what it does is gives us the ability to collect this information and data so that you can hand it off to another person within the program and let them follow through, whether it's leads, whether it's tasks, whether it's reminders for bids being due, sales functions that need to be closed up and minded, all the way. You can really drill down quite significantly in understanding that customer and that customer need with CRM and the application of it. So we'll have to figure out what is the right fit there. And then, of course, we have to establish your revenue targets and needs. What do we need to bridge that gap or get beyond that NSF grant or whatever your funding source is to help you become self-sustaining? Any questions on that? Next slide, please. What do you see? Click it one more time, Julianna. Can you see the forest through the trees? You know, we get so focused on the project and the original scope that you're not able to see all the opportunities. It could be in the building, it could be at the campus, it could be beyond, but we get the blinders on and we're so focused on our work that we can't see the forest through the trees. We can easily slip into situations where we walk past these opportunities. As we work with each of you in the Rev-Up program, we are looking at the projects to see where the synergies are. And you may be surprised where those synergies actually are. But let's hope we can walk through and discover that with you. Next slide, please. The dreaded elevator pitch. I won't make you do a napkin or any other drawing of an elevator pitch during this session, but as we get into this spring meeting in person, this is absolutely something we need to work through to make sure that you're prepared to pitch the project or your services to the person that you may happen upon. Has anybody done an elevator pitch for their project? I'll take the silence as a no. But this is your opportunity to make your pitch in a very polished 20 to 30 second time frame to sell or gain interest in your projects. As pre-COVID, of course, we did a lot of university events, possibly trade shows, flights, trips, social events. You just never know where you're going to run into that person. As I explained with Claire, you know, if I'm at a trade show, I've got a list of some key individuals that I am tracking down and working to have a brief conversation with. And exactly to this point of an elevator pitch, I want to grab that person's interest and solely grab the interest so we can have a further conversation once we're past this event. So you have to be ready. You have to be fully ready to do this in a very polished method. This becomes the foundation of your internal and external communications. The sales pitch, the presentation themes, it is who we are. You are that storyteller. So you have to get this mindset set and ready to go. Frequently in my sales teams, for presentation slide decks, your first 6 to 8 slides are always going to be the same, so they can repeat it without even thinking about it, and that's really where you have to get to, so we can have those really impactful communications to that right person, the needle in the haystack, if you will, or the unicorn. There's a million different ways to phrase it up, but you have that opportunity once to make that pitch, and it has to be perfect. If you're not prepared to tell the story about your business, you may miss the opportunity. It's the bottom line. Next slide, please. So as we go towards the Rev-Up program, a lot of this may seem overwhelming. We will be here to assist and coach throughout where needed and when needed. From my perspective, the crafting of the elevator pitch, lead generation, the sales funnel. You'll hear more and more about the sales funnel, leads, prospects, and customers. And then, of course, growing the sales opportunities, become self-sustaining. That's our goals. Anybody have any questions for me at the moment? with that, I will turn it over. Claire, is that you?
Now we're going to have Mike talk us through what the next steps look like and how you all can take advantage of these opportunities.
Okay, so we're here today doing this on-ramp as a proxy for, or as a precursor to what we wanted to do, which is this in-person event. We hope to do the event in the spring, and I can't stress enough that being present in person and working through all these different exercises on a big sheet of paper with your own team as well as with everybody else's team, providing feedback on what you're doing, really is a different kind of experience, and it's really been worthwhile. We've done something very similar to this in the Science Gateway Community Institute for 5 years now. It's universally met with very high marks, and we really hope to see you or some of your colleagues, as you see fit to recommend, that come and attend this session, because I think the value you get out of it's going to be quite a bit higher. And it's the way that we get to know more about your projects, and the way each other gets to know more about each other's projects, and helping as a community. And then we'll begin doing consulting efforts with those projects that are interested in it and want to continue forward. Next slide. Now, I did mention at the outset that there are additional ways beyond this stage 1, 2, 3 that we'll work with projects as they get further through. We do have the ability to help the productionizing some of the things in here that might not necessarily be what you feel are ready to go products. And this can be providing some scale up services, and maybe even providing some other technical assistance that can get things to that point. For projects that may consider operating as software as a service or some kind of a service, we do have a professional organization in place in the S3 division that does operate these things, and we're willing to consider bringing additional products into that fold. So if you're thinking this is interesting for you, but you really don't want to be answering client service calls and having a ticketing operation and all that kind of stuff, this is a service that we believe in some cases we can provide in partnership with you. And then Jean sort of wrapped up here at the end, and we're interested in participating in helping you sell these projects, maybe even doing some of that sales work for you as part of the process. And again, that's going to be on a case-by-case basis in terms of what we would think the prospects are for selling. As Dean mentioned, though, selling is one of those things that you can almost never completely outsource. I make a statement many times to most people when I was advising startups that when something like sales is never not your problem. It's the biggest single thing when we look at sustainability that can either win the day or lose the day. It's rarely the technology itself that is the thing that kills an effort. It's really the ability to get out there and get it in front of a large audience of people that could be potential subscribers or sponsors or whatever it is that's in line with what it looks like your potential business model might be. So these stage 4 through 5B are all services that if we get further down the road with a few projects, we're prepared to invest in those services if it looks like there's a solid business case to help those projects. And is that my last slide, Julianna, or is there more? Yeah, so reach out. You have some email addresses here. I'd recommend for most general questions, go ahead and reach out to Claire Sturm. she can direct things to where they need to go. I think we're still working on having a human legible version of the Rev-Up email address at SDSC. Right now, it goes to some strange Microsoft address, and but hopefully we'll have that here in the upcoming month, where it's a lot easier to get in contact to a general mailbox. Until that happens, though, feel free to reach out to Claire's email that you see here. Next. There is a next.
That's it.
That's the end.
That's all we have.
All right, well, great. So thanks everybody for attending today. Hope you got a little bit of a taste of what this is about. There's quite a bit more to it. We are here to help throughout the process. It's generally not any expense to you to have our help. And we look forward to continuing discussions with those of you who have an interest in this, and hopefully seeing you in person at an as yet not announced spring session. But we're all hoping that end of October comes along and we have better guidance on what we're allowed to do in person on campus. That part's out of our control, but hopefully we'll see how that turns out to the positive. So with that, I guess we can close. Claire, Julianna, Nancy, Jean, you want to say anything else?
Just a pleasure being able to talk to everyone today and hearing more about your projects, what you're working on. We will be sharing more information about that spring session, so have a follow-up email in the coming months once that's announced, so that way you can apply if you would like to join us for a full week workshop. Other than that, really a pleasure meeting you all.
Absolutely. Great to meet you all.
Any last
Thank
questions from anybody?
I want to say thanks. That's really helpful to get an idea of what the resources are available, and I'm ready anytime. So sounds good.
Nice to meet you all.
Yeah.
All right. Thank
Great.
you, and we'll see you soon.